Hello and welcome to this special edition of Arirang News for Tuesday, June 4th, here in South Korea in Minseonhi. The Korea-Africa Summit is scheduled to start this morning, and ahead of that event, we are covering live the arrival of the participating delegations at the summit venue at Kintex, the Korea International Exhibition Center located in Goyang City in Gyeonggi-do Province. Our coverage today shares live footage of greetings between President Yoon and his African counterparts at the entrance of the summit venue that will be accompanied by a studio panel discussion here on the broader related matters. And speaking about our panel of experts, I have Professor Kim In-kyung, Associate Professor of African Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, that is, here in the studio. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I also have Ho Song-yong, the founder of the NGO Africa Insight, based here in capital Seoul with us, who has so graciously allowed me to refer to him using his English name, Stephen. Welcome to the program.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Right, Professor Kim, we'll start with you. Let's begin with the significance of this multilateral summit between Korea and Africa. What do you believe is the importance of this inaugural meeting?
The 2024 Africa-Korea Summit that is taking place today in Korea for the first time represents a significant movement in acknowledging Africa's strategic importance on the world stage. As major powers like the US, Japan, and Western allies deepen their involvement in Africa, there's a noticeable increase also in engagement of China, Russia, and UAE. So this summit not only highlights South Korea's dedication to strengthening our diplomatic economic bonds with Africa, but also positions Korea as a prominent player across Africa. By hosting this summit, Korea aims to utilize technological expertise and development know-how to establish impactful partnership that can contribute to Africa's sustainable development.
Right, indeed. And Stephen, speaking within your capacity as the founder of the NGO Africa Insight, what are your thoughts on the timing of this particular meeting? Some say it should have taken place earlier, others claim it's better late than never. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, surely as a personal level, I wish it's happening more earlier. But as someone advocating for stronger Korea-Africa relationship for over a decade, I'm very delighted to see this summit is taking place finally in Korea. It's very commendable, and as the potential for cooperation between Korea and African nations is substantial. However, Korea seems a little behind when we compare to the Japan and China, which is our neighbor country. Japan started TCAT from 1993, and China launched FOCAT in 2000, and both holding their event 8 times. For Korean case, the significant engagement with Africa started after President Roh Moo-hyun's visiting to three Africa different countries back in 2006. Since that, Korea has organized COAF from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 5 times and COAFEC from Ministry of Economic and Finance 7 times so far. But this summit marked the first head of state level meeting. So I hope it leads to more regular high-level exchange, fostering the robust Korea-Africa partnership.
Right. And before we delve further into today's discussion, let's take a moment now to turn to the venue of the Korea-Africa Summit, where a total of 48 delegations from Africa, including 25 heads of state, are scheduled to sit down for the inaugural gathering. For details thus far, I have my colleague, Choi Min-jung, standing by live. Min-jung, welcome. So what's the latest there?
Hi, Sunny. The historic summit is just moments from starting here at the Korea International Exhibition Center in the city of Ilsan. Heads of states and representatives from 48 African countries will soon arrive and make their way to the summit venue. Taking part in the summit are 25 African heads of state, and now the summit is being held under the theme of the future we make together, with a focus on 3 goals: shared growth, sustainability, and solidarity. The main opening ceremony will kick off soon, and the leaders will begin discussions following the opening remarks. After a leaders' luncheon and closing ceremony, there will be a joint press conference by President Yoon and African Union Chair and President of Mauritania, Mohamed Al Ghazouani. Prior to the summit, South Korea held a welcome dinner banquet yesterday, and President Yoon engaged in a series of bilateral meetings with counterparts from more than 10 countries, including Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Lesotho, Cape Verde, and more. Tomorrow, South Korea will host a business summit as well as 13 sideline events.
Right. Minjung, this particular summit, it's been garnering quite a lot of attention as it marks the first top-level multilateral meeting between South Korea and its African counterparts. Do tell us more about its significance.
You're right, Sunny. The summit is the first of its kind promoted by the South Korean government, and South Korea says partnering with Africa, whose strategic importance is on the rise, is not a matter of choice but of necessity, especially at a time when the influence of the global South has never been greater. Africa is also seen as a key partner for South Korea in realizing its foreign policy aspiration of becoming a global pivotal state. Now, with this in mind, the top office laid out 3 key aims of the summit. First, strengthening economic cooperation for co-growth. Second, promoting the transformation of industrial and digital infrastructure, focusing on the agro and fishery industries. And lastly, tackling global challenges together, especially through agricultural technology transfer projects. President Yoon also said that securing critical mineral imports and boosting trade ties with Africa are also among the main aims of the summit. This is all I have for now, but we will be back with more updates on our morning newscast. Sunny.
All right, Minjung, thank you for that coverage. That was our Minjung, Choi Minjung, reporting live from the venue of the Korea-Africa Summit. Now, for those of you just tuning in, we are covering live the scenes just ahead of Korea's first summit with its African counterparts, scheduled to take place this morning at Kintex. And against that backdrop, we also have a panel discussion on some of the broader issues at hand. For that, like I said earlier, we have Professor Kim Eun-kyung from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Kim, the UN administration's hosting of this particular summit has been linked to its quest of becoming a global pivotal state. How does Korea's partnership with Africa look to support its quest?
Yeah, actually, this summit meeting would really help to elevate Korea's role as a pivotal player on the global stage, while it boosts its leadership in multilateral diplomacy and fostering robust international collaboration further. So by hosting this summit, Korea is taking a prominent role in advancing peace, security, democracy, human rights, rule of law, climate action, and development efforts. Through these engagements, Korea aims to deepen its diplomatic and economic connections with African countries and also strengthen its influence as a global leadership in worldwide, underscoring its commitment to tackling pressing global issues and promoting sustainable development.
Right, for sure. Stephen, pundits point out that the Korea-Africa Summit also serves the objectives of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Now, for the sake of our viewers who may not be familiar with this particular agenda, could you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. So the African Union's Agenda 2063 aims for the continent to achieve 7 key goals by 2063. 1, a prosperous Africa with inclusive growth and sustainable development. 2, an integrated continent based on Pan-African ideas. 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights. 4, a peaceful Africa and a secure Africa. 5, an Africa with a strong cultural identity and value. 6, an Africa driven by its people, especially women and youth. 7, an influential global player and partner. So for Korea to establish its effective cooperation with Africa, aligning our effort with this developmental goal is crucial. As it's 2024 and nearly 40 years remain for this long-term agenda, substantial progress will take time. The AU has developed a PACE plan, but detailed execution, monitoring, and outcome measurement are essential. I believe Korea can contribute and support this aspect.
Right. Professor Kim, among the nations partaking in the Korea-Africa Summit today are the leaders of 4 countries who have also been invited here to South Korea on official visits. Now, they include the leaders of Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Mauritania, which also is a co-host of the summit as it chairs the African Union this year. First then, what is your takeaway from President Yoon Suk-yeol's meeting with his counterpart from Sierra Leone, President Julius Maada Bio, that took place last Friday?
Senegal had gone through a long civil war, so-called Diamond War, Blood Diamond War. Since the end of the civil war in 2002, that country has made a significant political strides, holding 5 general elections with successful, peaceful transition of powers, which means both countries, Korea and Sierra Leone, have shared values of freedom and democracy. And also Sierra Leone has two-thirds of the population engaged in agriculture. And then we also provide aid in the agricultural sector, and they engaged in the K Rice Belt project. Korea implemented it in the West Africa. And the other key sectors of bilateral cooperation can be the economic and education and health. And especially the health sector, South Korea has a track record of providing medical emergency aid during the Ebola crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. It cements its role as a reliable partner. So both leaders have also expressed its keen interest in continuing their close collaboration on the international stage, especially in their capacity as non-permanent members of the UN. They stress the importance of enforcing sanctions against North Korea, North Korea's nuclear and missile practices.
Right, indeed. Yeah. Stephen, also on the bilateral front, Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan sat down with President Yoon Suk-yeol this past Sunday for bilateral talks. What are your prospects regarding ties between these 2 countries, South Korea and Tanzania?
Yeah. In Swahili, which is widely using language in Tanzania and Eastern Africa, we say karibu sana, which is welcome, so welcome. So I really welcome the strengthening of Korea, Tanzania, and Tanzania-Korea cooperation. As someone who first started my experience in Africa through Tanzania. So since establishing diplomatic relations in 1992, both countries have developed a friendly relationship so far. Tanzania holds a significant geopolitical position in East Africa with rich tourism potential, natural and human resources, and political stability and economic growth prospect. So I believe Tanzania should be one of key partners for Korea. And also enhancing people-to-people connection is vital for increasing cooperation. And Tanzania is famous for its touristic attraction to the Korean people too, like Mount Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa, and Serengeti National Park, a worldwide famous national park, and Zanzibar Island. So this can spark interest and lead to greater exchange and translating into economic cooperation later. So recently, PostCo International agreed to import 750,000 tons of natural graphite from Tanzania over 25 years. And Korea started negotiation for an economic partnership agreement, EPA, the first of its kind with an African country. So I hope to see more successful example like this between Korea and Tanzania. So about the North Korea, while we monitoring North Korea's activities in Tanzania, but Korea should focus more on area where we can create synergy and we can have a strength.
You mentioned earlier that you were actually there in Tanzania.
Yeah.
What took you to that African country?
Yeah, I was a university student, and out of curiosity, I want to have some meaningful time in my life. So I decided to volunteer for a year, and I carefully choose which country I should go, and Tanzania was the one.
What made you choose Tanzania?
Just out of options that I can choose, Tanzania looks like very interesting to me, and it was most unknown country for me, so that's why I
What was your experience there like? You were there for 1 year then?
Yeah, 1.5 years back in 2008, so it's already 15 years ago. So I was working in NGOs and UN, and it was really valuable and special time, full of lessons that I learned for my life. And especially what stood out for me most was the people. So Tanzanians are really warm, welcomed, and hearted people with a really diverse culture and with a hospitality. So through them, I learned so many important things like community, living together as a harmony. So this experience expanded to my interest to also history and cultural aspect of Tanzania, as well as Africa as a whole. So after that, I also became aware of the misconception and the prejudice about Africa that many Koreans and international people have. So that's where I realized that we need a new insight into the African continent. So although I never imagined starting an NGO back then, looking back, I see that the seed for founding the NGO, Africa Insight, were already planted during that time. So the invaluable lessons and experiences in Tanzania played the significant role in shaping my vision and passion for the work I do now, and I'm deeply grateful for that period of my life.
Do you see slight changes, perhaps, in the public perception of Africa here in Korea as well in recent years?
Yeah, sure.
Is the public more aware?
Yeah, now more people talking about Africa and more people willing to travel and interacting with African people. I can really feel and see the changes.
I see. I spent my childhood in East Africa as well, Kenya. I was telling you this before we start the program, and you mentioned Swahili.
Yes.
In Korean, we have an expression, pali pali, quickly, quickly.
Yes.
It's something my father used to say quite often, and his friends in Kenya would say pole pole, which means slowly, slowly.
Yeah, that's true.
It was a concept we learned there to take a leisurely pace in life then. True. Professor Kim, moving forward, Ethiopian President Abiy Ahmed Ali was also with President Yoon Suk-yeol for a bilateral summit this past Sunday. Now, Ethiopia was one of the few African countries that sent soldiers to fight in support of South Korea against North Korea. What more can you tell us about the selfless sacrifice by the Ethiopian soldiers here on the Korean Peninsula?
The military assistance Ethiopia provided during the Korean War carries really immense importance. As one of the founding members of the UN, Ethiopia, led by Emperor Haile Selassie, promptly answered the UN's call for the need in the Korean War. So they dispatched medical supplies and prepared troops to join the UN forces. And Ethiopia's swift and resolute support played a vital role in the transformation of South Korea from a war-torn nation to a prosperous and modern economy.
Do you think, Professor Kim, that we need to do more to let the public here know or be aware that Ethiopia also took part in the war? Because we are very aware of how American soldiers were here, soldiers from the West were in Korea, but not a lot about how African soldiers also partook in the effort to ensure democracy here in South Korea, right?
Yeah.
Now, Professor Kim, do you suppose this story of Ethiopia for South Korea could perhaps serve as a foundation then for further bilateral partnership?
Yeah, Korea and Ethiopia shared a rich history and strong commitment to cooperation, just like I said. They form a solid foundation for enhanced alliance. Both leaders discussed and stressed the importance of enforcing sanctions against North Korea's nuclear and missile programs And Korea has played a significant role in Ethiopia's infrastructure development, contributing to projects like power grids, road construction, river management, along with the support with education, scientific fields, crucial for Africa, Ethiopia's socio-economic development. Moving forward from now on, both nations are eager to broaden their cooperation across various sectors also, like including mineral development and defense industries.
Right. Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question, largely based on what Stephen and I were talking about earlier. But as a professor in the field of African studies at Hanguk University, do you see your students becoming, what part of Africa are your students more interested in, do you think?
Our university has 3 parts. We all actually cover almost all the African continent, East, West, and South. But I think the more developed countries like South Africa, definitely Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania is because of its potential. The students are more interested. Obviously, but sadly, small countries like, I don't know, Equatorial Guinea or Gambia, small countries are neglected or sometimes not well recognized. That's kind of sad.
Right, it really is. And are there any efforts perhaps by Africa Insight, Stephen, to raise greater awareness about the smaller African countries?
Yeah, so we intentionally try to invite or organizing some cultural event together with the small country community residing in Korea so that they can represent even without the embassy residing in Korea. So we intentionally try to promote more diverse experience to the Korean audience and general students.
Right, that is good to know. Stephen, as I mentioned earlier, Mauritania, it's a co-host of the inaugural Korea-Africa Summit. Now, I'm aware that this is the country where back in 1975, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung traveled to on a state visit. Now, since then, ties between Mauritania and North Korea have more or less deteriorated, but ties with South Korea look positive. What are your thoughts on the potential partnership between South Korea and Mauritania?
Yeah, so first of all, Mauritania might unknown country for many people. So Mauritania is an Islamic country in Western Africa, bordered Senegal and lies below Morocco. It covers 1 million square kilometers and has a population of 4.5 million. Currently, it chairs the Africa Union under President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, who served until early 2025. So historically, as you mentioned, Mauritania and many African countries had a strong tie with North Korea. So North Korea, even when they're constructing a big sculpture like that to the many African countries. But however, Mauritania is now strengthening cooperation with South Korea, as seen in this summit. So,
right. Stephen, I'm going to have to interrupt you a little bit. We have live footage coming in from Kintex ahead of the Korea-Africa Summit. We have our Korean hosts greeting the African delegations as they make their way into the venue of the summit to hold talks which begin on this Tuesday morning. For those of you tuning in right now, we are bringing you live coverage of the scenes from the venue of the first Korea-Africa Summit. The meeting itself is scheduled to take place later on this Tuesday morning. That would be in a few minutes, in about an hour or so. The meeting is taking place at Kintex, the Korea International Exhibition Center, located in Goyang City in Gyeonggi-do Province. Out of the 55 African Union member states, 48 nations are partaking in the Korea-Africa Summit. And out of the 48, 25 heads of state are here to take part in the summit talks in person. Now, on the sidelines of the multilateral meeting, President Yoon Suk-yeol is also hosting bilateral talks with his counterparts from these 25 nations. Right, we have the delegation from South Africa arriving, the ambassador. The order of the arrival of the delegations has not been disclosed. Now, South Africa, as our Professor Kim Eun-kyung here in the studio mentioned, is one country with great economic potential, of course, one that South Korea also seeks to forge greater economic ties with. Right then, as we wait for the next delegation to arrive, perhaps we'll continue with our discussion, panel discussion here in the studio. Professor Kim, generally speaking then, what would you say are the greater gains of stronger ties with Africa for South Korea?
So this 2024 Korea-Africa Summit actually presents substantial strategic advantages, especially given recent shifts in global supply chains and the emergence of value alliances and protectionist measures. As a country heavily reliant on external sources, Korea encounters obstacles in securing essential minerals crucial for its renewable energy sector, electric vehicles, energy transition, and carbon neutrality objectives. Africa, boasting abundant reserves of these critical minerals, offers Korea a strategic opportunity to stabilize its supply chains. Furthermore, the summit serves as a platform to deepen engagement with Africa's 1.4 billion population, tackling interconnected issues such as security, development, climate change, and food security, increasingly recognized as global priorities. As bolstering its presence in Africa, Korea can secure markets and resources, obtain international support, and take the lead on critical matters such as renewable energy investment, piracy prevention, and refugee crisis. The Korea-Africa Summit asserts its influence and forges partnerships with the continent, assuring long-term stability and growth amid a swiftly evolving global landscape.
Right. Now, as for those of you just tuning in to Arirang, today we are bringing you live coverage of the arriving delegations to the Korea-Africa Summit, the first one of its kind. The summit itself is taking place on this Tuesday morning at Kintex in Goyang City, Gyeonggi-do Province. Meanwhile, Stephen, some pundits claim Korea's engagement with Africa needs to be centered on empowering people in the continent. What are your thoughts?
It's definitely right. By 2050, 1 in 4 people globally and 1 in 3 youth will be from Africa continent. So Africa's growing talent and potential make it increasingly influential to the world. So Korea's advantage lies in strengthening human capacity through education and fostering exchange. We must approach this with mutual empowerment and learning, not as a provider. A top-down approach in education can seem patronizing and have negative effect. Instead, we need a horizontal approach in our programs. By fostering mutual learning and empowerment, both countries can teach and learn from each other, creating balanced and effective cooperation.
Right. Does the Africa Insight seek to perhaps create a bridge between those interested in learning about Africa or learning about Korea?
Yes, that's true. We found that there are a lot of misconception and indifference. So people consider Africa as a one negative general concept. And there is lack of effort to learn about each different cultures and historical background of African countries. So that's why Africa Insight is trying to fostering a better understanding through the educational program and the cultural activities or campaigns, sometimes against the discrimination or negative remark.
Right, indeed. And of course, trying to create a better understanding between the peoples of the two parties is one objective of the Korea-Africa Summit. Now, according to some pundits, the Korea-Africa Summit aims to advance collaboration between Korea and its African counterparts on 5 main fronts. The first one being strengthening partnerships, enhancing cooperation in various sectors, including trade, investment, infrastructure, and technology transfer. The second on promoting sustainable development by supporting African countries in nurturing economic growth, social progress, and environmental sustainability. And the third, as Stephen mentioned here in the studio, encouraging people-to-people connection by facilitating cultural exchanges and educational programs, of course. Another agenda among members of the Korea-Africa Summit is the addressing of global challenges, collaborating on issues such as climate change, peace, security, health, as well as poverty. A final agenda would be the enhancing of diplomatic ties by building stronger political relationships and promoting mutual understanding and respect between Korea and Africa. That being said, Professor Kim, staying with Korea's contributions to Africa then, to what extent can Korea effectively share its economic growth strategy with its counterparts in Africa?
Sierra Leone is one of the African countries that has drawn inspiration from Korea's development model, but it's not just alone. Many other African countries also see Korea's strategies as useful for their own development goals. However, to be honest, it's worth noting that not all African diplomats and policymakers share this perspective. While some recognize Korea's development experience as beneficial, others raise concerns about its applicability to Africa's distinct cultural, societal, and environmental context. Moreover, given the dynamic nature of the global economy, there's ongoing debate about how well Korea's approach aligns with Africa's current challenges and priorities.
And personally, Professor Kim, what are your thoughts about our strategy aligning better with the needs of Africa? Surely we need to tailor it to fit the needs of the people there then?
Yeah, surely. There's many aspects or areas we can cooperate with Africa. With using our strength in technologies and we also have similar experiences, historical experiences with many African countries. Like we experienced colonization and civil war, and also dictatorship, authoritarian regime. So kind of we sympathize with many African countries, and they also want to reflect our model into their development models. So we have been neglecting the continent of Africa so far, but now it's the beginning, new beginning. We can cooperate and put more efforts to have better cordial relationship with African countries.
Right, for sure. Meanwhile, Stephen, what would you say has been the impact of soft diplomacy? This, of course, including Korean entertainment as well as the sport, taekwondo, on promoting ties between South Korea and Africa.
Yeah, I can definitely see the increase of the interest to the K contents from Africa continent. So reflecting on my time back in Senegal, although it's a decade ago, I recall how popular events like the Ambassadors Cup Taekwondo tournament and Taekwondo demonstration by the professional masters of Taekwondo, whole village people, whole people in the city, they gathered to watch that demonstration. And more recently, during my work to promoting the understanding between Korea and Kenya, I found that the Sejong institution in Kenyatta University, they really love the K-pop and K-drama, so they even make a fan club for that, and they copy the the dance of the K-pop and K-dramas. So given that Korea has been relatively late in strengthening its cooperation with Africa and doesn't have the same extension like a strong historical tie or large-scale investment as some other countries, we should actively leverage our soft power, which hold significant appeal and value in African nations nowadays. So, however, it is also crucial to be cautioned not to fall into cultural superiority. While promoting our culture with pride, we should also show interest in learning about African cultures, because there are 54, 55 countries in African continent. For example, Nigeria's media country industry known as Nollywood, producing over 1,000 pieces of contents annually, and it's available on various platforms nowadays. Additionally, Afrobeats music and dance are extremely popular and trending in the world. So by approaching cultural exchange from a mutual and horizontal perspective, showing interest and learning from their culture as much as we promote ours, we can create a more profound and effective soft power influence, I think.
Right, for sure. And I don't think I asked you this earlier, but when were you in Senegal?
Yeah.
Because we only spoke about you being in Tanzania. When did you travel to Senegal? And how long were you there for?
It was back in like late 2010 to early 2013. It's more than 2 years and a few months. So I stayed a very far from the capital city, 6 hours from, in a very small town. I taught a future teacher of the Senegal on IT, skills. So it was really also another good memory of my life. I learned so many different things, but the interesting thing is like Tanzania, Senegal has also very similar kind of culture. They are the Teranga, the country of Teranga, and Teranga means the hospitality, welcome, living together. You are my brother and sister. So this whole different, area of African East and West, but I found this commonality. So that's the touching point for me.
And when you were in Senegal at that particular time, were they much aware about Korean culture?
Not really. So people usually asking, are you a Chinese? And then are you a Japan? And then when I say I'm from Korea, they said, I'm from the North Korea, so you are Kim's family, like that. Because especially Senegal, they have a big stature called, Africa's Renaissance. So that people have, better aware about the North Korea. Somehow media is always covering about North Korea things. So but nowadays I can see the, whole different reputation for South Korea. Those friends back in 10 years ago, they contacted me, like, I watched this, film from the, Parasite, or, some, famous drama from the, some media. It's from Korea, right? So I really feel now this soft power reaching out even to the far Western African country.
I would have to agree with you. Just a while back, we had a guest from Nigeria, and she spoke about how her friends had a BTS meeting in Nigeria recently.
True.
Professor Kim, speaking as a scholar, how effective has Korea's soft diplomacy been in engaging its global partners over the recent years?
It's a difficult question.
It really is.
Korea's efforts in soft diplomacy across Africa have actually encountered some challenges, despite the Korean government's clear focus on projecting a robust image of soft power through public diplomacy as a primary tool for global leadership. But in Africa, while Korea's trade volume with Africa remains tiny, like modest at 1.9%, and only a small fraction, 0.03% of respondents in the one of the biggest public opinion survey institute, which is Afrobarometer. In this survey, only 0.03% of the population regarded Korea as a development model. So there are even though there are notable strengths that Korea has capitalized on this. So these strengths includes the deployment of missionaries. I think we still have strength that includes the deployment of missionaries, NGOs, and other civil society organizations actually operating in the continent, as well as the positive image fostered through Korea's cultural experts and scientific achievements. However, it's crucial to acknowledge that just mere interpersonal interactions or favorable perceptions of Korean culture alone might not significantly sway public attitudes towards diplomatic policies. So what we need is a more comprehensive and systematic strategic approach to effectively mold Korea's soft power influence in Africa and beyond.
Right, and speaking about soft power, Professor Kim, with regard to the African studies provided at your university, what does your course cover? Are we talking about the history of Africa or the culture of Africa? What aspects of the course does African studies cover here in Korea?
We cover almost all the areas.
And what are students most interested in?
Actually, the Department of African Studies started as a language department. So we focused on like Kiswahili, Zulu in Southern Africa, and Hausa in West Africa. But it has expanded to various areas covering social sciences and cultural studies. So yeah, as far as the instructors can cover, we are covering many different courses. So personally, I teach political economy of West Africa, East Africa, and yeah, so many, also international relations. As a political scientist, I teach those courses.
Right, I see. Good to know. Well, for those of you who are tuning in right now, we're bringing you live coverage of the greetings taking place at the venue of the first Korea-Africa Summit, which is set to take place at Kintex. We have images of Kintex and of the African delegations arriving to the venue as we speak here in the studio. Now, according to the government here, Africa, it's the continent of the future, with 60% of the population under the age of 25. And given the inauguration of the African Continental Free Trade Area in 2019, Africa is rapidly evolving into a vast single market with a population of 1.4 billion and a GDP of $3.4 trillion US. This is, of course, according to the South Korean government. Meanwhile, Korea itself has endured a dark history of colonization, which is something that Professor Kim In-kyung here in the studio mentioned, as well as, of course, the Korean War to ensure unprecedented economic growth, which is often referred to as the miracle on the Han River. Now, Korea has transformed from being a beneficiary of international aid to becoming a donor country, seeking to contribute to the well-being of the international community, and that, of course, would include the continent of Africa. The future that Korea and Africa seek to shape together is in line with Korea's quest of becoming a global pivotal state, as mentioned by our panelists in the studio today, contributing to global freedom, peace and prosperity, and the African Union's Agenda 2063, as mentioned by Stephen here in the studio, for sustainable development and integration of the African continent as a whole. The organizers of the inaugural summit say, as equal partners, Korea and Africa committed to creating a future together for shared growth, sustainability and solidarity, which is also the theme of the inaugural Korea-Africa Summit. Right, and Stephen, as the founder of the NGO Africa Insight, what efforts are being made by your entity to boost greater awareness of Africa among the broader general Korean public?
Yeah, sure. So Africa Insight, founded back in 2013. So over the past decade, Africa Insight diligently has undertaken various initiatives to raise awareness and bring in new insight about continent of Africa among the general Korean public and students. And it's encouraging to see a shift in people's perceptions. So one of our flagship projects is the Seoul Africa Festival, which we started in 2016. It is the largest African cultural festival in Korea dedicated solely to African themes. We've held it 6 times so far, and the 7th event is scheduled for October this year. So each year, nearly 50,000 people attend this festival. Additionally, we conduct the Ubuntu Africa Global Citizenship Education Program, which is certified by UNESCO for Education for Sustainable Development. This program educates diverse groups, including the general public and students, promoting a balanced and open perspective on Africa with the basic knowledges. We also run campaigns to combat discrimination and prejudice against Africa in Korea. For instance, we advocate for apology from public figures for discriminatory remarks about Africa and work to end the practice of poverty pornography, where extreme emphasizing of poverty of only a small part of somewhere in Africa used to promoting more donation, increasing. Lastly, we contribute to shaping government policies on Africa by submitting policy recommendations and providing advisory services to enhance diplomatic and public awareness strategies. So more information can be found from our website or social media channels.
What are your plans for this year after the Korea-Africa Summit? I'm sure it's going to be a very busy year for you.
Yeah, the early part of the year, we support this cultural event with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs before the summit to promoting the cultural experience and cultural heritage of African continent. Also, we submitted another policy recommendation focusing on enhancing support for African students residing in Korea for their studying opportunity, also their working experience in Korea. So the later part of this year, we will focusing on organizing the 7th edition of Seoul Africa Festival, which is planned to happen on 12th of October in Banpo Hangang Park, which is very popular area. So like any other years, we will try our best to include as many as possible African community residing in Korea, also embassy to genuinely representing Africans. So this festival is always organizing not, of course, by the Korean leading, but by African leading, so that together we're making a great festival together.
Right, indeed. And back on the Korea-Africa Summit, Professor Kim, plans are in the works to make this particular summit a regular event taking place every 4 or 5 years. What are your thoughts on this endeavor?
Making the Korea-Africa Summit a regular event could bring about numerous advantages for sure. Besides formalizing high-level exchanges similar to the Korea-Africa Summit, it could promote deeper bilateral cooperation with key nations, fostering mutual interest and expanding joint initiatives. Moreover, regular summits would facilitate the cultivation of regional experts across various fields, promoting sustainable development and capacity building initiatives. Establishing a substantive and regularized Korea-Africa Summit or high-level cooperation body is increasingly seen as necessary. Leveraging platforms like KUAFEC from the Ministry of Economy and Finance, KUAFIC from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and the Korea-Africa Forum or Summit by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could effectively identify and address pertinent agenda items.
Right, indeed. Professor Kim, speaking to the Agence France-Presse, which is a French international news agency prior to the Korea-Africa Summit, President Yoon Suk-yeol spoke about the importance of bolstering trade ties and of securing key minerals, as Korea is a tech manufacturing powerhouse, but it relies on over 95% of mineral imports for its production. And the Yoon administration is hoping that Africa will serve as one possible market for its mineral needs, as it needs to secure a stable supply chain, given the geopolitical tensions in the region, including China and other countries. What are your thoughts on Africa serving Korea's needs of key minerals?
Definitely, they are the key actors in supply chain of minerals, the key chain. So that's one of the reasons why this summit is so important. And then, like I said earlier, our Korea is a resource-lacking country, actually. So we kind of desperately need, but it's not just, this summit should not focus on seeking minerals, but it should go with other like cooperative agendas, like shared interest and shared growth, prosperity, solidarity, and so on. But it'll be
But shared growth, solidarity, and sustainability, as you mentioned, of course, is the theme of this inaugural summit between Korea and Africa. And as you mentioned, Professor Kim, it's really important to ensure that the focus does not rely entirely on trying to secure certain minerals, but also to ensure that there is a bilateral understanding for greater economic growth. Stephen, aside from making the summit among leaders a regular event, what types of people-to-people exchanges do you propose to keep ties active? Of course, you've shared quite a lot of potential programs that, of course, your organization is currently undertaking. But aside from those, what else do you propose?
Yeah, I think there are several ways to foster people-to-people exchange, but one of the quickest and most effective methods is to enhance cultural exchanges. Imagine hosting a K-pop concert or cultural event in various African countries, following the popularity of K-pop and K-dramas. Or conversely, if renowned Afrobeat musicians visited Korea to hold a concert or collaborated with a Korean artist, it would be spark interest and awareness about Africa among many Koreans. However, for this exchange to happen, more policies and budgetary support are needed, along with a dedicated institution to oversee such initiative. So I personally hope that organizations like us, Africa Insight, or many culture and art-related organizations, where they already try to promote this kind of people-to-people exchange, not only from Korea, but also from the African countries. If they can receive more opportunity and support, they will lead this process of people-to-people exchange. And additionally, increasing scholarships for African students to study in Korea, supporting Korean students to explore more opportunities in Africa. This will boosting academic exchange, will create another better environment for mutual understanding and cooperation.
You mentioned earlier, Stephen, how you traveled to Tanzania because of your interest in Africa as a student. Compared to back then and now, do you suppose there are more networks available to cater to Korean students interested in studying or going to Africa for experiences?
Yeah, traditionally, usually the volunteer program from the International Development Corporation, NGO, or government agency like Korea International Cooperation Agency, they expanded their candidate to volunteer. It's keep expand year by year. So the easiest way is still through the volunteer experience, which not only going for the helping, but also can learn a lot of life lessons. But nowadays, travel opportunities or exchange opportunities is increased, and we have better information, and we can easily find more information from the internet. So I think the general environment and context became much better compared to the 10, 15 years ago. So whoever the youth who is really interested to travel or doing something in Africa, I think they have a better opportunity now.
Right, and Stephen, as you're speaking, we have the President of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan, arriving at the venue of the Korea-Africa Summit. Now, she held her bilateral talks with President Yoon Suk-yeol earlier on the sidelines of this multilateral meeting, during which, according to our correspondents, there has been an agreement to offer Tanzania $2.5 billion in aid over the next 5 years. Now, this, of course, would be one way of cooperation that is between the two countries. we are covering live the arrival of the African delegations to the venue of the Korea-Africa Summit. And along with that live coverage, we also have a studio discussion where we are addressing some of the related matters as well as the broader agenda of this inaugural summit. Pundits claim the agenda can be roughly divided into 5 big objectives, the first being the strengthening of partnerships, enhancing cooperation in various sectors, including trade, investment, infrastructure, and technology transfer, which is something that our Professor Kim In-kyung here in the studio mentioned earlier. A second objective is the promoting of sustainable development, of course, supporting African nations in their nurturing of economic growth, social progress, and environmental sustainability. A third objective is the encouraging of people-to-people connection, which the founder of the NGO Africa Insight here in the studio, Stephen, has been highlighting, encouraging people-to-people connection by facilitating cultural exchanges and, of course, educational programs to and from the 2 regions, that is, from South Korea to Africa and from Africa, of course, to South Korea. A fourth objective is the addressing of global challenges, which also is a universal agenda, the collaboration on issues such as climate change, peace, and security, especially here in this part of the world amid North Korea's persistent provocations, health, given the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic earlier on, as well as, of course, poverty. A fifth objective of the Korea-Africa Summit is the enhancing of diplomatic ties by building stronger political relationships and promoting mutual understanding and respect between Korea and Africa. Professor Kim, does Korea's broader engagement with Africa take it a step closer to becoming a global pivotal state?
Yes, I think so. Korea's expanded engagement with Africa undeniably places Korea closer to the status of global pivotal state. By broadening its diplomatic, economic, and development cooperation efforts in Africa, Korea showcases a dedication to a global leadership and a readiness to interact with diverse regions beyond its immense influence. As Africa gains increasing prominence on the global stage, Korea's proactive involvement not only bolsters its soft power, but also heightens its strategic importance. So by leveraging its expertise and resources to tackle key challenges facing African nations, such as infrastructure development, education, healthcare, and technology transfer, Korea is increasingly acknowledged as a reliable partner in Africa's pursuit of sustainable development. This widened engagement highlights Korea's ambition to assume a more assertive and influential role in shaping the global agenda, thus bringing it closer to the status of a pivotal state on the world stage.
Right. And that being said, Stephen, this is an impromptu question. The Korea-Africa Summit, of course, comes amid Korea's vision to become a global pivotal state, as mentioned earlier, but also amid Africa's vision for Agenda 2063. Now, this is something we touched upon earlier, but for the sake of our viewers who may be tuning in to watch our coverage right now, do tell us again a bit about the Agenda 2063.
Okay, so the Agenda 2063 is established back in 2013. We can see from 2013 to 2063 is a 50-year long-term plan. So this is aiming for the continent is achieving the 7 key goals by 2063, unitedly put their effort together. So the goal 1 is a prosperous Africa with inclusive growth and sustainable development. 2, an integrated continent based on Pan-African ideas. 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights. 4, a peaceful and secure Africa. 5, an Africa with a strong cultural identity and values. 6, an Africa driven by its people, especially women and youth. 7, an influential global player and partner. So for Korea to establish effective cooperation with Africa, aligning our effort and strategy to Africa with these internal development goals within Africa is very crucial. And as it's 2024 and nearly 40 years remain for this long-term agenda, so we have a lot of time. But so the AU has already developed paced plan step by step, but detailed execution, monitoring, and outcome measurement are essentials. So I believe Korea can contribute to achieving and develop this Agenda 2006 by our own way of support in each aspect.
Right, of course. And simply speaking, Stephen, on a personal level, perhaps, what are your hopes for ties between Korea and Africa in the near future?
That's a big question.
It really is.
But I hope this summit can be a new open door and become a new platform which helps rediscover and reinterpret Africa, which opened, for Korean perspective, which often viewed through the outdated stereotype, recognizing its immense potential and diversity. By embracing an open perspective and avoiding premature judgment, Africa will be like this or that, we can appreciate the remarkable change across Africa. Africa continent should also consider the unique values they can offer to Korea, and Korea should reflect on what it can learn from Africa. This mutual reflection can foster meaningful, balanced partnership. Consistent follow-up and actions are essential to ensure this summit leads to the real implementation of promises made. Continuous monitoring will help Korea and African countries develop special win-win relationship. So I'm also committed to working toward these goals at the civil society level, building sustainable and meaningful partnership.
Right, which is also why the Union administration is hoping that this particular summit will become a regular event taking place every 4 to 5 years to ensure, of course, a greater sense of consistency, as Stephen, you mentioned, with regard to projects that are undertaken by the two sides, of course. Professor Kim, this, of course, again, it's an impromptu question, but what are your hopes with regard to ties between South Korea and Africa in the near future?
As emerging power, African countries has huge, immense potential. So we should not lose this opportunity to make a good partnership with African countries. But we have to be very strategic, and that's why we need more experts in various areas. So the government should support more academic experts to, because we are a small country, we have very small pool of academics compared to other big countries. Like even compared to Japan, we have very small proportion of academics in this field of Africa studies. So to have this kind of big event in the future again and again, we need further develop our pool, not only the academic professionals, but also the youth, young professionals, so that we have, we also develop our own potential to meet the need of African countries as a strategic partner.
Right, of course. And all this coming against the backdrop of the inaugural Korea-Africa Summit, which is taking place on this Tuesday morning, June 4th, here in South Korea. And we are bringing you live coverage of the arrival of the African delegations to the summit venue for talks, of course. Mauritania is a co-host of this first Korea-Africa Summit as it holds the chairmanship of the African Union this year. The presidents of South Korea and Mauritania are also scheduled to hold bilateral talks on the sidelines of the multilateral meeting on Wednesday. That being said, Stephen, what can you tell us about this particular country, Mauritania, and its potential cooperation with South Korea?
Yeah, Mauritania might be somewhat unfamiliar to many people. It's an Islamic country located in West Africa, sharing its southern border with Senegal. We're also located in below the Morocco. It's a country where the approximately 1 million square kilometers, and it has a population of around 4.5 million. So this year, Mauritania holds the chair of the Africa Union, a position it assumed on February 17, 2024, during the 37th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Head of State and Government of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani took over from the President Azali Assoumani of the Union of Comoro, who served as the AU chair for 2023, and Mauritania will hold this position for 1 year until early 2025. So it's true that many African countries, given that the African Union is a collective organization representing all African countries, the role and influence of the chair country are very significant. Therefore, it is crucial for us to maintain close communication with Mauritania. By doing so, we can better understand and address the needs and expectations of not only Mauritania, but also AU member countries. This will enable us to develop tailored policies and cooperation strategies that are specific to each country's unique context. So in summary, enhancing our relationship with Mauritania, particularly in its role as AU chair, can open new avenues for different and more effective collaboration across the African continent.
Right, and of course those are the broader hopes being shared by all participants to this first Korea-Africa summit being held here in South Korea, of course. We are bringing you live coverage of these scenes at the entrance of the summit venue. 48 African delegations out of the 55 member states of the African Union are taking part in the inaugural multilateral meeting. 25 of the 48 participating nations are being represented by their heads of state. And President Yoon Suk-yeol has spoken on the sidelines of the multilateral meeting with his counterparts from the 25 states. He has started speaking with them, that is, and on Monday alone, he spoke with the leaders of 10 of those countries. Cooperation on the economic front, cooperation on infrastructure development, and cooperation on creating a better digital environment were also on the agenda of those bilateral talks. This particular live coverage has been taking place for over an hour now. And that being said, then, Professor Kim, perhaps for those of us joining right now, you could tell us a bit again about the significance of this inaugural meeting between South Korea and its African counterparts. That is taking place given President Yoon Suk-yeol's proposal back in November 2022, when he suggested raising the ministerial level talks to summit level talks, of course. So what do you believe is the importance of this summit level interaction?
The 2024 Korea-Africa Summit that is currently taking place is in Korea for the first time ever, presents a significant moment in acknowledging Africa's strategic importance on the world stage. Major powers like the US and Western allies, usually the European countries, deepen their involvement in Africa And also there is a noticeable increase in engagement from non-Western countries like China, Russia, Turkey, and Arab Emirates. So this summit not only highlights South Korea's dedication to strengthening diplomatic and economic bonds with African nations, but also positions Korea as a prominent player in the competitive landscape of global influence across Africa. So by hosting this summit, Korea aims to utilize its technological expertise and development know-how to establish impactful partnership that can contribute to Africa's sustainable development and bolster its geopolitical relevance.
Right, and adding on to what Professor Kim has just said, speaking about the potential of Africa, I'll take a moment now to share information given by the government here earlier on. Africa itself is a continent of the future, the government says, with 60% of its population under the age of 25. And given the inauguration of the African Continental Free Trade Area in the year 2019, Africa is rapidly evolving into a vast single market with a population of 1.4 billion and a GDP of $3.4 trillion US. Meanwhile, South Korea, for its part, shares some history, painful history as it is, as mentioned by President Kim earlier on, a dark history of colonization as well as that of the Korean War. To ensure that it reached unprecedented economic growth as we speak, which is often referred to as the miracle on the Han River, Korea has also transitioned from being a beneficiary of international aid to becoming a donor country, which is why it is seeking to contribute to the well-being of the international community and to becoming a global pivotal state under the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. The future that Korea and Africa seek to shape together is in line with Korea's quest of becoming a global pivotal state and contributing to global freedom, peace and prosperity, as well as the AU's Agenda 2063 as shared by Stephen here in the studio for sustainable development and integration of the African continent as a whole. Stephen, I believe we talked about this earlier on at the start of this live coverage, but there are many who talk about the timing of this particular inaugural meeting. Some say it should have taken place earlier. Others claim it's better late than never. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Korea should feel privileged and honored to hosting this head of state level summit, because a country inviting many head of states from the continents, right? So we should be proud of this. But when we compare our neighbor country like Japan and China, since they already started this kind of Africa Cooperation Initiative for Japan back from the 1993 called Tokyo International Conference on Africa Development, TCAD, and for China, Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAD, in 2000. So when we compare to Japan and China, we can say we are relatively late. But also there's a saying that the best time to start is now. So I don't think we are too late, especially when I closely working and communicate together with many African residents in Korea. They have a special expectation, or they consider Africa's Korea somehow different with other countries. As just Sunny mentioned, Korea became a very unique first country who were the developing country before become a developed country. And many African countries wonder what is the secret of the success and know-how. But we should be very humble and not arrogant, because back in 30, 40 years ago, and now the global environment is quite different. So instead of just try to giving something by what we know or learn, but really hands in hands working together with Africa, understanding, have a deep sympathy with the common historical background and context to which shared Korea and African nations are together. And if we're working together, I really believe that Korea and African nations can be a real good partner in the future, who can really become a leader and pivotal state for the global society. So in that means we are not that late. This time is the earliest moment. So more important thing is from now, how we are going to do. So that's why the follow-up, monitoring, the action plan is much more important, not just declaration of the just few days summit. Really tailored follow-up with each country will make another different future between Korea and African countries.
Right, of course, because actions speak louder than words. So you need to take a proactive approach to the discussions that take place today at the Korea-Africa Summit. Last week, Stephen, I had the pleasure of speaking with members of an online platform called African Voices in Korea.
Sure.
They share information about life in Korea among the African community here in the country. That being said, Stephen, what do you suppose perhaps are some of the challenges that our African residents face here in South Korea, that as well as efforts to perhaps better address these challenges? What do you propose?
So true, but in fact, the population itself is quite small. Only about 20,000 African residents living in Korea, approximately up and down. But the most population among that 20,000, almost 1 of 4 of the population has the visa with the difficulties like refugee status or some difficult situation. So that also the students who are studying in Korea, although they are super talented and studying very well, after their graduation, having this job opportunity is quite limited. And sometimes during their application process, they receive some kind of unseen discrimination or unfair treatments. So that, but still we have room to improve. So that I think working together with the communities, embassies, and throughout these summits and civil society, promoting awareness, and then we can hosting more African students to Korea, and they will expand their opportunity and experience in Korea. Then I think that environment will change it slightly, step by step. So we need more time, but there's some difficulties. Yeah.
Right. And Professor Kim, this is something we talked about earlier on as well, but generally speaking, what are the gains for South Korea with regard to ties with Africa, and what also does Africa look to gain from stronger ties with South Korea, do you think?
First of all, what we can gain from Africa, the summit actually provides substantial opportunity for cordial relationship with African countries, especially because these days there is a recent shift in global supply chains and the emergence of value alliances and protectionist measures. So as a nation heavily reliant on external resources, Korea encountered obstacles in securing essential minerals crucial for its renewable energy sector, electric vehicles, energy transition, and carbon neutrality objectives. So, but Africa, having abundant reserves of these critical minerals, can offer Korea a strategic opportunity to stabilize its supply chains. Not only the mineral supplies, but the summit also serves as a platform to deepen our engagement with Africa's 1.4 billion population, which means we can tackle interconnected issues such as security, development, climate change, and food security. Those are all recognized as global priorities. So by promoting its presence in Africa, Korea can secure markets and resources and obtain international support. And we can take the lead on critical matters such as renewable energy investment, refugee crisis, and all that.
Right, so hopefully those issues will be better tackled during the Korea-Africa Summit that is underway today, Tuesday, June 4th, here in South Korea, of course. Right, well, the summit appears to be underway, and details of this inaugural multilateral meeting will be covered in our following newscasts throughout the day. Now, out of the 55 nations of the African Union, 48 nations are taking part, and out of those 48 nations, 25 are being represented by their heads of state, with whom President Yoon Suk-yeol has been hosting bilateral talks on the sidelines of the broader summit under the Korea-Africa meeting, of course. Well, do stay tuned to Arirang News for more, and thank you for watching.